She had 17 days to live. 17 days from the moment the guards seized her at Greenwich Palace until the French swordsman's blade separated her head from her body. But Anne Boleyn didn't know that yet. On May 2nd, 1536, she was still Queen of England, still wearing her crown, still believing she'd reconcile with Henry VIII the way they always did after their explosive fights. Instead, she was dragged to the Tower of London, the same fortress where she'd spent the night before her coronation just 3 years earlier. The same stone walls, the same Thames River flowing past. But this time, the May air carried a chill that cut through her gown, and she knew with absolute certainty she would never leave this place alive. What she didn't know was that her death warrant had been signed weeks before any charges were invented. What she couldn't have imagined was that the man who'd shattered the Catholic Church, who'd defied the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor, who'd risked civil war just to marry her, that same man would now destroy her with accusations so absurd they'd shock all of Europe. But let's go back to the beginning. Because Anne Boleyn wasn't supposed to become Queen of England. She wasn't even supposed to catch Henry VIII's attention. Born in 1501, most likely at Hever Castle in Kent during a brutal English winter, Anne entered a world where being born female and noble meant your entire life was a chess piece in someone else's game. Her father, Thomas Boleyn, was one of the most ambitious men in Tudor England. Her mother, Elizabeth Howard, connected the family to the powerful Duke of Norfolk. This wasn't some nobody family. This was aristocracy with connections threading through the highest courts of Europe. And Thomas Boleyn had plans. While other fathers were content to marry off their daughters to rich lords and forget about them, Thomas wanted something different. He wanted his daughter educated, not just in needlework and prayer, but in languages, politics, diplomacy, the skills that could make her invaluable at any European court. Why? Because Thomas understood something most men of his era didn't. An intelligent daughter could be worth more than 10 sons if you played your cards right. So in 1513, when Anne was barely 12 years old, Thomas made an extraordinary move. He convinced Margaret of Austria, the governor of the Spanish Netherlands, onto the most powerful man in Europe, Charles Thunberg, to take Anne into her household. Think about that for a moment. Margaret of Austria was one of the most formidable women in European politics, wielding power in her own right over territories that would become modern Belgium and Holland. She didn't need to accept some English courtier's daughter into her court, but Thomas Boleyn was charming, bold, and strategic. He asked, and somehow Margaret agreed. Later, Margaret would write that Anne was very intelligent and learned quickly, the kind of student who absorbed everything like dry earth, soaking up rain after drought. This was Anne's first crucial lesson. Powerful women existed, and they could shape the political landscape just as effectively as any king. For a 12-year-old girl in 1513, witnessing Margaret of Austria command respect from emperors and princes must have been revolutionary. But Anne's time in Mechlin would be short-lived, because European politics never stayed stable for long. Everything changed when Louis XV of France needed a new wife. His queen, Anne of Brittany, had died, and England's Henry VIII saw an opportunity. He offered his own sister, Mary Tudor, to seal an alliance with France. But this infuriated the Spanish, who'd been promised Mary for one of their own princes. Margaret of Austria was livid, another English betrayal. Yet Thomas Boleyn, ever the opportunist, saw his chance. If Mary Tudor was going to France, his daughter should go too. Margaret reluctantly agreed to release Anne, but there was a problem. Anne couldn't get back to England in time to join Mary Tudor's entourage. So Thomas did something brilliant and ruthless. He sent Anne's younger sister Mary as a substitute, promising Anne would follow. When Anne finally arrived at the French court after Mary Tudor's coronation as Queen of France, she walked into the most sophisticated, cultured, and politically complex court in Europe. And then, just 3 months later, Louis XV died. Mary Tudor became a widow, secretly married Henry VIII's friend Charles Brandon, and returned to England in scandal. But Anne Boleyn stayed. Someone at the French court, likely through her father's influence, had requested that this English teenager remain as a lady-in-waiting to the new Queen of France, Claude, wife of the young, charismatic, ruthless Francis III. For the next 7 years, Anne Boleyn disappeared into French court life, and during those 7 years, she was transformed from an English girl into something entirely different, a woman who traveled further than Henry VIII or Catherine of Aragon ever would. In October 1515, when Francis V returned victorious from battle in Italy, his mother Louise of Savoy decided to take the entire court south to celebrate. Anne, as part of Queen Claude's entourage, traveled through the Loire Valley, past Toulouse all the way to Marseille on the Mediterranean coast. Picture this: massive royal processions stopping in every major city, with tapestries hung depicting powerful women, pageants celebrating Louise of Savoy and Queen Claude, crowds gathering to witness female power made visible and celebrated. For a 14-year-old girl, watching city after city honor these women as political forces, not just decorative queens but actual wielders of power, the impact must have been staggering. And then Anne saw the Mediterranean for the first and only time in her life. The endless blue water, the warm southern air so different from English winters, the cultural sophistication of southern France with its blend of Italian, Spanish, and French influences. She was absorbing everything: perfect fluency in French, understanding of court intrigue, the art of conversation, the delicate balance of flirtation without scandal, the techniques of diplomacy. But she was also sending intelligence back to her father. Because here's what most histories miss: Anne wasn't just living at the French court for her own education. She was Thomas Boleyn's eyes and ears at the heart of French power. When Queen Claude suffered through one of her many difficult pregnancies and spent a night in terrible pain, Thomas Boleyn somehow knew about it immediately. Who else would have told him? Who else had intimate access to the Queen's private chambers? Anne was already playing a role, perhaps not officially as a spy, but as a source of valuable political intelligence. Her fluency wasn't just conversational. She could understand rapid French spoken by multiple people simultaneously, catch jokes and double meanings, understand the cultural context that foreigners always miss. When Henry VIII and Francis V met at the Field of Cloth of Gold in 1520, that legendary summit where two kings tried to outdo each other in magnificence, Anne was there. Not on the English side with her family, but on the French side with Queen Claude. It was the first time she'd seen Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, and at that point, Anne's relationship with Catherine was one of respect, even admiration. The Boleyn family supported Catherine. There was no rivalry, no tension. Just a young woman of 20 meeting the Queen of England and thinking nothing of it. But by 1521, England and France were sliding toward war again, because England and France were always sliding toward war. Thomas Boleyn called his daughter home. Francis III was reportedly upset. Why was this talented young woman being recalled after 7 years? He knew something was shifting. When Anne returned to England, she was 20 years old, perfectly bilingual, culturally sophisticated, and unlike any other woman at Henry VIII's court. She was immediately placed in Catherine of Aragon's household as a lady-in-waiting. She was supposed to marry well, perhaps to Henry Percy, heir to the Earl of Northumberland, with whom she fell genuinely in love. They had an understanding, maybe even a secret engagement, until Cardinal Wolsey intervened, until Henry VIII himself intervened, because Henry had noticed Anne Boleyn. And when Henry VIII wanted something, he didn't care who got destroyed in the process. The Percy match was killed. Henry Percy was forced to marry someone else. Anne was devastated, and then Henry made his offer, "Be my mistress." The standard arrangement. He'd had mistresses before. Bessie Blount had even borne him a son, Henry Fitzroy, whom he'd acknowledged and given titles. Being the king's mistress meant gifts, lands, status for your family. Most women accepted. Anne Boleyn said no. Let's be absolutely clear about something. Anne did not pursue Henry VIII. She did not scheme to become queen. She did not break up Henry's marriage to Catherine. In 1525, Anne wanted to marry Henry Percy and live as a countess in northern England. She had zero interest in becoming the king's mistress, a position that would ruin her reputation and marriage prospects while giving her no real security.